Hi there and welcome to the first episode of Tableau in 2 minutes in 5 years almost. Goodness gracious, what a long time it has been. What we're going to start with today is an update to a long form video that we did many years ago that's become one of the most popular videos, walking through all of the basic features of Tableau. Now, Tableau's changed a lot in the 5-6 years since we put together that video, so some of the views look a little bit different. We're going to connect to a different data source, and then we're going to build ourselves some visualizations and a quick dashboard with some filtering, just demonstrate all of the features of Tableau. So when you first log in, this is the screen that you're going to see. This is the first screen you'll get when you first open the file. This is a brand new installation, so there's nothing in the this list of open files here or past files here. If you do have files that you've opened or that you've worked on in the past, those will show up as thumbnails in this list. And we can connect to data using any of the options here on the left-hand side. Now we're going to connect to a Microsoft Excel file, but you can also connect to a CSV, any of these other types of files. And there's also a bunch of other options that you can install as connectors. If you have the full version of Tableau, you're going to have a lot more options up here, particularly for databases and things like that. So let's go ahead and get connected to our data here. We're going to connect to a text file. So you can see in here we have this hotel booking file. We'll give that a second to load up. This is the first screen that we see. This is our data file. It gives us an opportunity to look at a number of different things about this particular file. There's only one sheet in this workbook. It's this CSV. And down here we have an overview of all of our data. So this is all of our fields and our field names. This used to be just a big table in the old version of Tableau. But list of fields and field names, we can name the data source something different. And then we have a quick overview on the right-hand side here of what our data looks like. If we wanted to join together a different file, so maybe we had like a file with some details on each of the hotels in this source, we can pull those in. We have to double click into the hotel booking file, and then you can see this is the one table. We would drag out the other table, and then we'd have some options to join it together using some SQL style joins. So either a left join, right join, union, things like that if we had two tables together. We don't have a second table, so right now we're just going to leave it with this one booking source. And we're going to go ahead and click right into our first worksheet. This is the sort of workhorse view for Tableau. So this is where we're going to build all of our visualizations. We already connected to our data. Our data set is up here. This is all of the fields within the data set in this list on the left-hand side here. And then we have a number of shelves up here that we can use for different parts of our visualizations. We have pages, filters, columns, rows, and this marks card, which allows us to put things on the color shelf, size shelf, text shelf, and so on and so on. We'll use a handful of different parts of these as we go through this, this tutorial. So no need to worry about what they all do right now. Let's focus over here on the left-hand side. Now, we used to have two different lists called measures and dimensions in the older versions of Tableau. In this new version, it's just one big list and a couple of different things to think about. Up on the top, we have all of our measures. So we do still have measures, and down on the bottom, we do still have dimensions. Our dimensions sit down on the bottom. You'll also see there's a data type icon, and some of these icons are different colors. So you'll see that up here on the dimensions, in the list of dimensions, they're mostly blue. And down here at the bottom, they are mostly green. So dimensions are how we want to slice our data. Measures are what we're measuring. And the color of this icon indicates whether Tableau has identified that data as continuous or discrete. So discrete would be like individual values. Continuous would be something that is number-based. So, you know, this ADR, adults, agent, these are all numbers. And up here, it is all, credit card, customer type. These are all text fields that are dimensions. One of the things to think about as you walk through this, right, is that we do have year and day of month up in the top here. These are labeled as numeric fields. That's going to impact the way they show up on the visualization on the data if we pull them in like that. So that's something that we are going to be, just to be careful of. If you see something showing up weird in one of your visualizations, it might be because you have the wrong data type attached to it. Second thing to think about is down here we have some fields that are ones and zeros as well as the number fields, right? So we could multiply ADR, we could sum up the number of adults. This is cancelled and is repeat guests. Those are indicators. So they're a 1 or a 0 indicating whether something was cancelled or whether it's a repeat guest. This is not necessarily a continuous variable, right? We wouldn't want to sum up the is cancelled. We can move things between the dimensions and the measures by just picking them up and dragging them from one place to the other. And you see that when we drag both of these up, they turn blue. So they are now discrete and they are in the dimensions field. So they're going to appear when we pull them into our visualization as dimensions instead of measures. Now, did I warn you this video is going to take a little bit longer than 2 minutes? That's because we're covering a bunch of different things in this particular section, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and make ourselves our first visualization. So what we'll do is we're going to pull out this market segment field. I'm going to drag that over onto my rows shelf. You can see that it gives us this nice list of the market segments. And then we're going to take ADR and we're going to pull it out over. Now, did I warn you this video is going to take a little bit longer than 2 minutes? That's because we're covering a bunch of different things in this particular section, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and make ourselves our first visualization. So what we'll do is we're going to pull out this market segment field. I'm going to drag that over onto my rows shelf. You can see that it gives us this nice list of the market segments. And then we're going to take ADR and we're going to pull it out over here. And you can see we've created a little bar chart. Going to flip these so that they sort in the right order. And it really is as simple as that, creating most visualizations. If we want to create different types of visualizations, we have the option to use this Show Me button up here. That will give us all of these options. You can see that some of them are grayed out. Those ones don't work with the number of dimensions and measures that we have on the page right now, but there are a bunch that do. So you can click on any of these. It will change the visualization type. You can also come over here to this marks card and you can click on this drop-down list to come up with something specific. If there's a specific type of chart that you're looking for, you can do that on this on the marks card over here just by selecting the different chart types. Now, in this particular data set, I happen to know that ADR is not actually ADR. That is the rate on the booking. So coming from a background in hotels, I want to make sure that's correct. So we're going to go ahead and create a couple of calculated fields. What we're going to do is we're going to use the drop down up here. We're going to jump into creating a calculated field. It brings up this little box, and inside this little box, we're essentially going to type our formula for the calculated field. Now, there's a couple of different steps that we're going to have to go through to do this. And what I like to do when I create my calculated fields is I like to create them in small chunks. So I don't like to do too much with one calculated field. I like to create a calculated field that is as low level as possible and then gradually build them up with a series of calculated fields until you end up with the calculation that you want. I think that gives you a lot more flexibility when you go to I think that gives you a lot more flexibility when you go to do different things, or maybe you need to pull something out halfway through a calculation. It makes it a lot less complicated and it does make the calculations a lot easier to read. So this first one we're going to do is we're actually going to calculate the room nights on each reservation. This is essentially the number of nights a reservation stayed, because we have two different numbers for that. We have the number of stays in weeknights, and we have the number of stays on weekend nights, weeknights and weekend nights. And what we're going to do is we're going to sum these up. Now, I want to note a couple of things about this. First off, we don't have any aggregate functions wrapped in these. So that means that for every row of our data set, we're going to calculate this value. And then when we drag this out, we're going to be able to sum it up. It's not going to be a pre-aggregated field. When we go to use this in different calculations, we may want to aggregate it. Essentially, this means that if you imagine the data, why don't we hop back to the data source here? If you imagine in this data source, we're going to calculate this value for room nights across every single row of this data set. It'd be essentially like adding a column on the end of the data set. All right, so let's go ahead and create that. You can see that popped up down here. All right, so now we're going to create a calculation for revenue. So I'm going to go ahead and create another field here. And what we're going to do, again, we're going to make this a row level calculation. We're going to take our room nights and then we're going to multiply it by the rate on that reservation. And all I did there was I typed in the name and then hit enter. Let's go ahead and create that calculated field. Now we're going to create another calculated field. This one's the actual ADR, so we're going to call it ADR aggregated. And what this is going to do is going to calculate the ADR weighted by the number of room nights. So we're not going to calculate the individual rate and average that out. We're going to sum up all of our revenue, we're going to sum up all of our room nights, and we're going to divide the revenue by the room nights. That's the industry standard way of calculating ADR, rather than having it sort of averaged across every individual row in the data set. So to do that, we're going to do a sum of our revenue, and then we're going to divide it by the sum of the room nights. Now, you may note that what we did to calculate revenue was take ADR and multiply it by the room nights. So why is this going to do it any differently? Well, if we go back to our data source, what happened in the data source was that we calculated this originally across each row of the data set. What we're going to do now is we're going to sum up each column of the data set, and we're only going to do the calculation on the totals. When that happens, we're going to get a slightly different value for ADR. And the way we can see that is by dragging our ADR aggregated field out, and you'll see that on the left-hand side, our ADR is being summed up across all the things. So we have quite a high value for ADR. It's sort of revenue-ish, but within the aggregated field, we're getting a much better sense for what people actually paid when they stayed. Even if we change this to a straight average, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this one, and I'm just going to move this onto the same shelf over here. And you can see that there's a difference. Even after we've averaged it, there's a difference between the aggregated ADR and the average ADR across each of these different market segments. Sometimes it's bigger right here in the direct segment, smaller right here in the corporate segment. So the difference between aggregated calculations and row level calculations can be quite significant. We do have another video on that if that's something that you would like to dive into. But anyway, let's go ahead and start creating some visualizations that we can put on our dashboard. We'll start off with a couple of simple ones looking just like we did there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my market segment. I'm going to put that on the rows shelf. Then I'm going to grab revenue, and I'm going to add revenue right here. So I created a new sheet by clicking on this button right here. Now I'm going to create our first dashboard. I'm going to click on this next plus sign. And you'll see that this view looks a little different. What we have here is a way to lay out a bunch of different visualizations on a dashboard. So these two sheets, this first sheet is the one that we created with our two ADRs on it. This sheet 2 is the second one that I created. And this open space in the middle right here, this is where we're going to arrange everything into a dashboard that's going to look good. We're going to be able to explore multiple visualizations at the same time. You can change the size of your dashboard by jumping into this size button up here. Now I'm going to set this to a fixed size. I always go for like a desktop browser or a generic browser or something like that to give us some real estate to work with. What you select up here really depends on where you're going to be publishing the dashboard and how it's going to be used. So something to think about as you pull stuff in, because some of these shapes for these sizes are going to be really different, and they're really going to impact the way that you pull stuff into the dashboard. Now, if I drag my sheet out and I just drop it on this dashboard right here, you can see that it takes up the whole space. It's like pops into this whole space. Now, that's a quirk of the way Tableau does layouts. To start laying out my dashboard, what I like to do is I like to take it and then I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard, and you see how this drops then into a floating container that you can pull down and resize as you want. That is the way I like to start laying out my dashboards. There are some layout containers which we'll get into once we have a few more things on the dashboard, but this is certainly the easiest way to start with. It gives you a sense of where things are going to go and how they're all going to relate to each other without getting too deep into how to use Tableau layout containers, which are sometimes quite challenging, as we'll get to. Now, one visualization doesn't make a particularly interesting dashboard. So let's go ahead. I'm going to jump down. I'm going to click on my new worksheet. I'm going to make us a second visualization. We're going to use distribution channel. I'm going to pop that over there. I'm going to pull revenue out again. You can see our 4 distribution channels: the travel agent, direct, corporate, GDS, and undefined, and how much revenue we made through each of those channels. Now, whenever you click to create a new dashboard down here at the bottom left, the dashboard's just going to add itself to the end of the line. One of the things I like to do to keep myself organized is I like to drag my sheets so that all of the sheets on dashboard 1 are before dashboard 1, so like sheet 2, sheet 3, dashboard 1. If we had a second dashboard, it'd be sheet 4, sheet 5, sheet 6, and so on, dashboard 2, just to help keep myself organized. So let's go ahead and add this to the sheet. Again, I'm going to hold Shift, pull it down, put it in place, and then we have two different visualizations, so we can begin to see the interaction between some of this information as we pull them through. Now, one of the other things that's really important, obviously, is the revenue over time. So let's go ahead, we're going to create ourselves a new sheet, and we're going to drag out some time series data. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to put revenue across on our columns shelf here. Nope, I lied. I'm going to put it on the rows shelf here. And then we have all these date fields, but we don't actually have a date. We have the arrival year. We have the arrival month. And then we have the day of the month. But the problem is when we have these all pulled together, you see how this comes out looking kind of weird. We don't want that. But the biggest problem is that we don't have a date field. If we had a date field, we'd be able to do a bunch of cool stuff with it. So we're going to go ahead and create a date field. Now, again, there's a couple of stages that we have to do. The first one is this arrival month is a string, right? If we pull out the arrival month and just take a look at what's in it, you can see that we have the month name, not the month number. We can correct that. So what we're going to say is we're going to call this arrival date month number. And we're going to use something called a case function. You could also use an if function for this. The case functions work the same as a case statement in SQL. So we're just going to say case this, and then we're going to set up a bunch of different when statements. So this is saying we're going to take this field, when it equals this, we're going to say, well, we're going to have it equal this. So when it's January equals 1. Then we're going to say when February equals 2. And so on and so on. So I'm going to type these out real quick. I'll come back when I'm finished. All right, so what we did there is we went ahead and created ourselves this field to convert the name of the month into the month number. So I misspoke, it wasn't an equals, we want a then. So when arrival date month equals January, then we're going to get a 1. Couple of things just to remember when you use these case statements is that you do want to include an else. I always like to include an else just in case something went wrong and I mistyped one of these values. That shows up really clearly. And then you want to make sure you include end at the end of the statement. If you get rid of that, you'll see once we click off stuff that it will give us an error. You can click on this and you can see where this error is coming from. You can do that with any of these pieces too as you go through. All right, so let's go ahead and create that. It pops up in our measure shelf because we created a number. We're going to drag it up top, and you can see that then it pops up as a discrete piece or discrete field up in the top here, along with our arrival year, our arrival month, and everything else. Now we still don't have a date, but what we can do is we can go in and we can create another field here. And I stress on this, I stay on this date conversion piece because there's a lot of data that we get, that we work with just in general where, you know, it seems like it should have a date in it or the date didn't come through correctly or it came through as a string. And there's a whole bunch of techniques within Tableau that you can use to pull that through. So what we're going to do, make a date. Took me a second to find it. And that's just going to take the year, the month, and the day, and it's going to convert that into a date. So we have the year already. We have the month already. We're going to use the number field, remember, not the arrival date month itself. And then we have the day field already. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And then we can take our arrival date field here. We can drag it on top of our month field to replace it. And then you'll see what happens is we get this view of year by year, 15, 16, 17. And we can expand that out by clicking on the pluses and minuses next to each field. Now, I don't like having the quarters in there. I don't think we need them to be split up, so we can take this out. We can drop it over there. And you can see that we now have a nice line graph of what revenue looked like over time. So let's go ahead and we'll drag that out onto the top of our dashboard. Stick it up at the top there. All right, pretty cool. We can see over this period not only what the trends were over time, but also which segments drove that and which distribution channels drove that. Now, this by itself is interesting, But what if we wanted to look at different items within this? Well, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. So let's go ahead and we're going to jump back to our graph here. We have two different hotels in this data. So I'm going to take this hotel field and I'm going to drop it out onto our filters shelf. Now, when that happens, you'll get this list of all of the items within the field. So in this case, it's the city hotel and the resort hotel. And you can select one or more. And that changes the data in the visualization to only represent what we're filtering for up here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go ahead and select both of them for now. So it's actually not changing the data from what we had originally. But when we go back to the dashboard, if I click on our sheet 4 up here, I can, if I click on this sheet 4 up here and then click on this drop down arrow, I can hover over filters and I can pull out my hotel filter. And you see how that pops out onto the sheet right here. And I have a way of dynamically filtering on my dashboard. Now you'll see right now that's only impacting this single sheet, right? The ones at the bottom aren't changing. We can change that. We're going to jump back to our sheet. We're going to go up to our filter and we're going to click apply to worksheets. And then we're going to say all using this data source. And that's going to give us this little icon next to it. And you'll see now that when we click on this, all of our visualizations are going to change based on what is in this filter. We can set this filter up to do a couple of different things. We can have it be a single value list. So that's going to be just a button where we can click a radio button. We could have it be a drop down with a single value. Again, we're just going to click one thing out of this list. We can click multiple values in a drop down. And the other thing that we can do that's really helpful is we can go in here and click customize. We can add an apply button. What the apply button does is it means that we can change this filter to our heart's content, but nothing in the visualization is actually going to change until we hit apply. The reason that's really helpful is because if you have a lot of different visualizations on a page, sometimes it can be slow for the filter to update. So you want to hold off and wait until you're ready or your user is ready to actually change the visualization before the visualizations update. So that will save you a little bit of time, makes it a little bit more usable. The other thing that you can do is you can make each of these visualizations a filter. So if you click on this little funnel button, you'll find now that when we click on everything within this visualization, it changes everything within every other visualization. We can do the same with our market segment. Nothing changes. Then we click on our filter and now everything starts changing. We can come up here, click on this as a filter. Now we can explore specific months and what the drivers were within specific months and whether it was different between August and say January in terms of the market segments and the distribution channels that this particular set of hotels drove. Now, still not a particularly functional dashboard, right? We don't have everything labeled. So what we have to do to add a title to each of these is we just double click on where it says sheet 4 at the top. We can click into this visualization. We can say this is revenue versus arrival date. Down here, we can call this one revenue versus market segment. And over here, we can say this is revenue versus distribution channel. All right, great. Now, we've got our graphs labeled. We've got our filters in place. We've got all of them acting as different visualizations. Let's say that we wanted to lock down this layout and pull it in so that it would be a bit more stable as it changes screen size. Right now, if we did this, sometimes floating layouts can get a bit funky. This is where we're going to start playing with layout containers. Layout containers are kind of a nightmare, if we're honest. But they're a necessary part of having your Tableau dashboard be stable as screen sizes change and things like that. There's two different types. There's a horizontal container and a vertical container. A horizontal container is going to line up two visualizations side by side. And a vertical container is going to line up two visualizations on top of each other. So if I drag myself out a layout container right here, you can see I dragged out a horizontal layout container. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these two lower graphs into that container. So we'll go ahead and drag this object in. Take this one. We're going to drag this one in. And you'll see as we do that, I can choose the side that I want it sometimes. Guess it's going to have to be over there. And then we can go down here, we can select the container, and then I can make my container bigger and smaller. And the nice thing is that now these are going to be perfectly aligned, right? So they're going to sit next to each other. Let's do the same with this arrival date and the filter up top, because this is also going to be these are next to each other, right? So we want another horizontal container up here. Going to take this visualization and drop it in. I'm going to take this in, drop it on the side there, and then I'm just going to select the layout container. I'm going to put that up top, and then we can just drag it to fill the space for now. And then you'll see that this sort of naturally floats because we don't need that much space for the filter, but it could be as wide as you wanted it, depending on how long the names are in your filter. And then we need one last thing to do. So we have two layout containers, one up top and one down at the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a vertical layout container. I'm going to take this visualization up at the top. We're going to select the horizontal container. I'm going to drop that into our vertical layout container here. Again, I'm going to select the vertical container. This is where things get kind of funky. We've got a layout container and a layout container. I'm going to take this one. I'm going to select this horizontal container. So I've got both the graphs. Then I'm going to drag this in, drop it on the bottom there. And everything is now packed into this vertical container. And I can drop this out, or if I wanted to, I can just drop this so that it pops to the size of the screen. And now we can sort of move everything around within those containers, right? So I've got all these borders I can use. How you do this depends on how you want to lay out your dashboard. As I said, I like to lay it out with floating containers first, just to make sure that it all makes sense. You can also add other items to your dashboard. So maybe we wanted to add a title, which you're going to grab the text. We're going to drag the text up to the top. We're going to say my first dashboard. It comes out kind of small when you first do it, but this is going to go all across the top. So let's pick ourselves a bigger font. 48. That sounds good. All right. Now we have a nice big title and a nice basic dashboard that we can use to explore this room night and revenue data for this hotel that I grabbed from Kaggle. I'll put some links in the video description. This dashboard is dead simple to make, so you should be able to do this in just a few minutes. If you like this video, then please do click like and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you next time. Check out the other Tableau training videos. We have a bunch on individual features of Tableau. And we also have a ton of other videos on data literacy, data storytelling, and how to use Tableau as a tool to present your data. So I look forward to seeing you again.